Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're undertaking a really substantial deep dive.
We really are. We've got a mountain of material to get through.
We're looking at a collection of eyewitness accounts, some really detailed journal entries, and a few fragmented histories. But they all point to one thing.
They collectively chronicle the 20-year period from 1579 to 1599 IC.
Exactly. The era known simply as the reign of High Templar Dominus. And, the sources are completely unanimous on this. They describe a time just dominated by institutionalized corruption, extreme state secrecy, and this terrifyingly focused pursuit of forbidden power.
And it's a pursuit that, as we'll see, systematically poisoned the intellectual and, you could say, the spiritual heart of the capital city, Theopolis.
Right. It wasn't just political corruption. It was something deeper.
That's what's so fascinating here. We're not just looking at a typical bad historical regime, with its political failings. We're dissecting a systemic, almost spiritual rot.
A rot. That's a good word for it.
It started at the very top, at the apex of power, and then it just spread downward through every single layer of society.
So our mission in this dive is to really get to the bottom of Dominus's singular driving obsession.
Yes. The ancient dark power locked within what all the sources call the virtue gems.
And then from there, we're going to track precisely how this one obsession systematically corrupted every scholar, every politician, every single ambitious individual he took under his wing.
Because he didn't just fund research, did he? It's
No.
much more sinister than that. He fundamentally transforms scholarly pursuit into pure, self-serving depravity.
And I think the most telling, the most immediate insight we get into his rule is actually what happened right after he disappeared.
The aftermath.
The aftermath. The sources immediately signal this intense, almost physical sense of relief. One witness, writing in his journal, describes the atmosphere in Theopolis as suddenly so relaxed.
That the weight had been lifted.
Exactly. A deep collective sigh that swept through the city. And this lasted for about 3 weeks, almost as if everyone had, suddenly stopped holding their breath.
But that moment didn't last.
Not at all. That public relaxation ended so abruptly. The city was watching for the traditional sign of succession, the plume of black smoke billowing from the Chamber of Innocence.
Which confirms the leadership was deliberating, right? Taking their time.
Taking their time. And then, without any warning, that smoke turned a stark, vibrant, and utterly ominous red.
That abrupt visual change is just a chilling moment of transition, isn't it? Black smoke signals deliberation, caution. Red smoke signals a choice has been made.
And often violently or swiftly.
Yes. It confirms the seneschals finally elected a new High Templar. And the rumor that came with that red smoke was that they had specifically sought out young blood.
Someone who could revitalize the Templar.
And usher them into what they were calling the modern age. But even with this, highly anticipated prospect of change, the condemnation of the old regime, it's immediate and visceral.
We don't even have to guess at the public's feeling on this. The swift, brutal judgment from one witness just sums up 2 decades of trauma in 5 sharp words.
The bastard set us back 50 years.
That's it.
That single line is a definitive historical summary. It immediately establishes Dominus not as some complex, necessary evil or even a traditional tyrant, but as a genuinely destructive, regressive, and ruinous force.
Despite his intelligence.
Oh, absolutely. Despite his formidable intellectual capabilities, which are constantly referenced, by the way, they call it a near-miraculous mind, his policies and his ultimate ambition resulted in utter decay.
He actively applied the brakes to societal progress.
He did. He traded any chance of advancement for the study and implementation of ancient, highly corrupting power. That statement tells you everything. His rule wasn't just stagnant. It was actively detrimental to the quality of life and the future of the entire empire.
This certainly sets a dark tone.
Okay,
let's transition into the architecture of his power, because his entire 20-year rule was founded on this act of calculated subversion.
It's all about monopoly.
Right. When he first assumed the High Templar role in 1579, the very first highly visible thing he did was declare his predecessor's esoteric research pursuits heretical.
And he didn't just declare it. He ordered the sealing of all related materials, labeling them blasphemous. A very public, very theatrical display.
Which immediately raises the question, why? Why the immediate public condemnation of esoteric knowledge when we know, based on everything that came later, that he was personally obsessed with that exact same knowledge.
The sources are pretty blunt about it. They strongly suggest this public display was a complete load of manure.
A fabrication.
Entirely. Designed specifically to secure those exact forbidden secrets for himself without any competition.
So if we look beneath that veneer of piety, by labeling those research materials as forbidden, he wasn't protecting the state from heresy at all.
Not in the slightest. He was ensuring that no one else, no rival scholar, no ambitious political faction could possibly access or utilize them.
It effectively guaranteed his own personal monopoly over the most dangerous, the most powerful, and the most forbidden knowledge in the land.
Precisely. His authority was constructed on a live sanctimony. He publicly preached against the very actions, the very research he was committing behind the heavily guarded walls of his cathedral.
And this institutionalized secrecy, it gave him the ultimate political cover he needed to pursue his true core motivation.
Which was tapping into the raw, dark power contained within those mysterious artifacts, the virtue gems. The sources are absolutely clear he was seeking ways to use this power that were explicit.
Not in line with God's plan.
To put it mildly.
And this leads us directly to his earliest, and I think most telling, staffing decisions. To achieve this deeply corrupt goal, he immediately enlisted top mechanical and thaumaturgical experts.
Including the highly skilled Cassia. Her notes give us a crucial early glimpse into the specific private mechanical ambitions of the High Templar.
Cassia's narrative is just pivotal, isn't it? Because it shows us the first signs of ethical resistance from within his own inner circle, and it immediately defines the stakes.
She was a brilliant mechanic, there's no doubt about that. But she very quickly recognized the inherent world-ending danger of what Dominus wanted, his desires for how the virtue gems should be used.
And she knew that just saying no was basically a death sentence.
Outright refusal was suicide. It would lead to immediate death or, at best, exile. So she employed a quiet, highly sophisticated act of ethical sabotage.
She didn't refuse his orders.
No, instead she chose to misinterpret them.
She describes the mechanisms she ultimately constructed as undeniably brilliant and powerful. These are marvels of engineering in their own right. But then she adds that they were fundamentally totally useless for his desires.
That is just a magnificent, calculated act of intellectual defiance. She used her expertise to build functional, complex, advanced machinery that intentionally failed to serve the master's dark, specific purpose.
All while maintaining the appearance of absolute obedience.
Absolutely. We can infer from the broader context that Dominus was looking for devices to, what? Channel? Amplify, contain the raw, volatile energy of the virtue gems.
Basically, a dark thaumaturgical power plant.
Exactly. And Cassia likely delivered these incredibly complex devices, maybe intricate clockwork regulators, or stunningly precise harmonic stabilizers, visually impressive, structurally sound.
But they had a flaw.
A crucial intentional flaw. They were probably perfectly designed to dissipate or neutralize the gem's energy safely, rather than focusing it into a weapon or a containment field for a person.
She gave him magnificent clocks when he needed a bomb trigger.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It really speaks volumes that even the people he pulled into his most secretive projects recognized the depravity of what he was doing.
But despite Cassie's incredible subtlety, her sabotage did not go unnoticed. The sources confirm that little slips past Dominus.
He was too focused.
Too singular in his focus. Too obsessed with the ultimate outcome of unlocking the gems to miss the fact that her brilliant results were delaying or failing to deliver on his primary dark purpose.
And the consequence for that quiet act of rebellion was immediate and ruthless.
Swift and absolute. Cassia was immediately exiled as a matter of secrecy, with no public trial, no fanfare, just gone.
And this was followed by her rapid replacement by someone she refers to with just profound bitterness as some little whore.
That rapid total replacement and the extreme contempt in Cassia's description of her successor, it shows Dominus's absolute strategic focus. He was willing to sacrifice anyone.
Regardless of their talent.
Regardless of their intrinsic talent or technical value, if they became a liability or even a minor obstacle to his deep-seated goal. Loyalty, skill, expertise, all of it was secondary to absolute, unswerving dedication to his quest.
And we shouldn't miss the psychological subtext of Cassia's language there.
No. Calling her replacement some little whore isn't just a personal insult. It's a commentary on the patronage system itself.
How so?
Well, Cassia defined herself by her intellectual brilliance and her ethical resistance. She views her replacement, who likely lacks her moral code and maybe even her skill, as just a desperate climber. someone willing to trade integrity for proximity to power.
A trade she refused to make.
Exactly.
Now, Dominus's obsession wasn't just focused on local Oriathan secrets. It was directed squarely at resurrecting the thaumaturgical arts practiced within the Eternal Empire.
And his choice of laboratory underscores this ambition perfectly. He didn't build a new facility. He adopted Chitus Cathedral itself as his personal lab.
Decking it out with everything his miraculous mind could conceive of?
You have to understand, the adoption of Chitus Cathedral is so much more than a logistical decision. It's a symbolic act of profane domination.
It was the spiritual heart of the city?
A spiritual heart. And he intentionally seized it, turning it into a high-tech fortress dedicated to dark thaumaturgy. It signifies his complete blurring of the line between religious sanctity and forbidden science.
He wasn't just experimenting.
No, he was performing an act of historical resurrection. He was trying to bring back an ancient, powerful, and deeply corrupt legacy, the legacy of the Eternal Empire, which, as we know, was built on power extracted from human suffering.
Let's look now at the network of corruption he fostered, specifically the scholars he drew into his orbit. Our first example is Aramir.
Ah, Aramir.
He initially embraced Dominus's patronage with the explicitly stated, self-serving hope of scholarly advancement.
And Aramir's journal. It details this chilling step-by-step progression of his research. It shifts from what he considered legitimate academic interest to a state of profound psychological horror.
He was tasked with scouring ancient, difficult-to-read documents on the Eternal Empire's masters of thaumaturgy.
Specifically focusing on the infamous Chamber of Sins, this was exactly the kind of forbidden, dangerous history Dominus was secretly obsessed with. Aramir started as a historian looking for facts.
And he became an archaeologist, unearthing a functional doomsday device.
That's it, exactly. His work progressed systematically until he found and began reading the ancient treatises concerning the Vaal. And this is his point of no return.
His research instantly shifted.
It went from merely examining the history of an old empire to confronting a sheer, terrifying, immediate horror.
The revelation for him was the scope of what he was reading. It concerned nothing less than the destruction of all mankind.
And Aramir admits in his journal that his fear of the end of the world seemed ridiculous on the surface, a kind of historical hyperbole, until he made the terrifying realization that definitively defined the stakes of Dominus's research.
It's happened before.
It's happened before.
That moment, that critical realization that the history he was reading wasn't just myth, but a chillingly accurate blueprint for a planetary apocalypse.
Yeah.
That's what drove his decision.
He immediately fled. He decided to take my secrets with me. It was an act of profound self-preservation.
His flight was an attempt to save his own mind and, potentially the world from Dominus, who was clearly planning to implement these blueprints.
It just showcases the immense intellectual and psychological cost of working under the High Templar. Aramir realized he wasn't advancing scholarship or history. He was actively pandering to the warped dreams of a madman.
His decision to abandon his comfortable position and run, it wasn't cowardice.
Not at all. It was the ultimate fearful recognition that Dominus was only interested in one thing, the black thaumaturgical power locked within the virtue gems, which he intended to use to create a new, terrifying empire in his own image, regardless of the cost to humanity.
That level of intellectual corruption is just horrifying to think about. Now let's turn to one of Dominus's most crucial and, frankly, most infamous recruits, piety.
Originally known as Vinia.
Exactly. Clarissa's accounts provide the raw details of her early life, noting that before her ascent, Vinia was a complex-driven figure.
She sold her thaumaturgy in the day, her body at night.
But Clarissa is very clear that Vinia wasn't just driven by money or desperation. She was striving for something better, nobler.
She possessed this raw, almost insatiable ambition, and it was all driven by the core belief that life needn't be this hard.
She was actively searching for a shortcut, a superior methodology or a powerful philosophy that could grant her that promised ease and power.
And circumvent the hard life she was currently forced to live.
And that ambition led her right into danger. Vinia was arrested for consorting with the unholy, a charge that speaks volumes about her extracurricular research, and was quickly condemned to the pyre.
But this happened just before Dominus initiated the mass banishments,
which provided him with the perfect opportunity to acquire a very valuable asset.
The sources suggest that the exchange that followed was purely transactional. It was clinical, devoid of any genuine mercy.
Dominus, in a calculated political move, shared a Last Supper with her.
And while many in the city believed Vinia earned Dominus's patronage simply on her back, Clarissa provides the crucial clarification.
Vinny gave Dominus something far more valuable than temporary comfort.
She gave him her vision of a better life, which was likely a superior philosophical or methodological approach to the thaumaturgical arts she was practicing. In exchange for what? In exchange, Dominus saved her life and gave her a new politically sanitized name, piety.
It was a cold, calculated trade. Ambition and dark knowledge for immediate political cover and absolute power.
And Clarissa emphasizes the bitter consequence of this transaction for everyone else. She says, you can count on one thing. Piety's grand future won't include the likes of you, me, or Tolman.
Reinforcing the cruel truth that you can change your name, but you cannot change your history.
Her past experience informs the absolute ruthlessness of her future actions under Dominus.
And that is the absolute essence of Dominus's patronage system, isn't it?
It is. It wasn't about building a loyal team or genuinely reforming a fallen soul. It was about acquiring a highly valuable, ambitious tool.
Masking her sordid, dangerous past with a veneer of political and divine righteousness.
And ensuring that this new tool, piety, was absolutely and ruthlessly dedicated to Dominus's dark, specific ends. The transactional nature of it all ensures she owed her entire new identity, her very existence, to him.
Which brings us directly to the actual horrifying philosophy underpinning the dark science piety pursued alongside her collaborator, Valenta.
They collaborated on research for what they explicitly claimed was the betterment of the human condition.
And Valenta provides the terrifying philosophical core of their work, a justification for their methods that is truly chilling.
Valenta asks the defining question of their utterly detached moral universe.
Would you consider the feelings of the stones when constructing a glorious cathedral in the name of God?
Yeah.
I think we need to slow down and just sit with that analogy for a moment, because it reveals everything about the psychological mechanism they use to justify atrocity.
It does. It implies an absolute and, frankly, pathological dismissal of their subject's suffering.
They literally saw human beings, the subjects of their research, as inert components, mere building materials, completely without interiority, consciousness, or rights.
Exactly. If the glorious result is the cathedral, the betterment of humanity as defined by Dominus and piety, then the materials you use, the stones, have no moral standing whatsoever.
And Valenta explicitly carries this logic to its horrific conclusion. She states that using slaves,
The primarily Karui slaves captured from the sea,
and those defined as enemies of God for these brutal experiments, was actually an elevation of their status.
an elevation. It's almost unbelievable. How could they possibly rationalize that level of cruelty as a benefit to the victim?
She argues that their participation lifted them from squalor to splendor. She actually claims it provided their otherwise meaningless lives with something greater than themselves.
That is the ultimate cold self-justification for torture and murder, reframing unspeakable suffering as a profound spiritual service.
In their minds, they weren't just torturing people.
No. They were offering a form of radical, necessary, and glorious salvation through experimental philosophy.
And we have Bannon, who witnessed some of this fallout. He confirms that Piety's results were brutally clear on the people she changed.
And he notes that the subjects were specifically slaves, and those explicitly defined as enemies of bloody dominuses, a very telling political designation.
It confirms that Piety's scientific pursuit was never about generalized advancement for humanity.
Not for a second. It was a direct, cynical extension of the High Templars' political purges, masked under the guise of divine judgment and cutting-edge experimental philosophy.
It was sanctioned, institutionalized dehumanization, wrapped up in the language of noble science.
And Bannon, who generally avoids simple moral labels, he concluded that whatever was lurking inside Valenta, it ain't good, not by a long shot. He saw the immediate, visceral evidence of their cruelty and the profound suffering of their victims.
Let's look now what Dominus actively avoided, because his omissions are just as illuminating as his obsessions. We know he locked away the sign of purity.
The sacred staff gifted to the first High Templar, Maxarius, from innocence itself.
He stored it deep within the ossuary. A witness notes this was quite reactive behavior for a man of such formidable intellect. So why? Why would the brilliant, all-powerful High Templar be so fearful of a staff of purity that he had to physically lock it away?
This is a vital piece of structural analysis, and Valenta's later studies provide the definitive answer.
She studied the staff.
She did. She analyzed its functionality and found that while it was capable of conducting and storing immense energy, it remained inert. It was completely unresponsive when she attempted to apply corruption to it.
Which suggests a fundamental, immutable truth.
This staff only responds to and amplifies true divine energy, the energy of innocence.
And the devastating implication for Dominus himself.
The implication is both structural and absolute. Dominus was inherently incapable of wielding true divine power.
He couldn't use it.
If the sign of purity is a repository for the power of innocence, he could never have touched it, let alone wielded it, because he was steeped as he was in the opposing power of the beast. His allegiance to corruption, whether chosen or acquired, was a physical barrier to true divine authority.
That reframes his entire 20-year reign. The very nature of his ambition, his decision to pursue dark thaumaturgy, the virtue gems, the forbidden knowledge of the Vaal. It was, in a way, forced upon him.
It seems that way. His inherent deep-seated corruption had already locked him out of the possibility of leveraging true, sanctioned divine power.
He couldn't wield the sign of purity, so he turned to the darkest, most ancient, and far more dangerous sources available.
It wasn't just a moral failing, it was a limiting factor in his pursuit of power. He was trapped on the path of the beast, which explains the reckless, all-consuming obsession he developed for finding alternative, non-divine, and ultimately destructive sources of power to establish his new empire.
He was aiming for the stars, but was forced to dig in the dirt for fuel.
A perfect metaphor.
Now we have to transition to the darkest and most forensically detailed chronicle in our sources, the descent of Templar thaumaturgist Devarro.
This is a tough one to get through.
Dominus assigned Devarro the task of studying the Vaal artifacts he brought back. And Devarro's journal entries give us a four-stage map of how corruption doesn't just happen randomly. It actively seduces, consumes, and remakes the intellectual mind.
This is the perfect, tragic case study demonstrating how Dominus's recklessness, his decision to bring these specific, ancient, potent artifacts into the heart of Theopolis, led to immediate, catastrophic human tragedy that was uncontained and lethal.
Let's start with Phase 1, as documented by Devarro. He calls it exhilaration and lost control.
He begins ecstatically. He sees this assignment as a brilliant academic breakthrough. He uncovers a hidden frequency of corruption within the relics that causes them to actively sing.
He sees this not as a warning, but as a success, a pure intellectual and spiritual success. He's seeing ghostings of ancient sacrifice right there in his lab.
This moment is the beginning of the intellectual seduction. The curiosity instantly leads to a loss of control because the artifacts are responding to him.
He immediately leaps to the conclusion that the Vaal culture must have extended all the way to Orieth's shores. He muses, perhaps we are not the first empire to pull itself up from the mire of this land.
He's exhilarated by the thought of being the key to this vast ancient wonder. But crucially, even in his ecstasy, the singing already pains him. The relics are actively communicating and tempting him.
And his objective research is, in that moment, transforming into a subjective, painful, spiritual experience. He's already crossed the line from observer to participant.
Right. And then we move swiftly to Phase 2, vision and contamination. He calls it the crimson tide.
In a terrifyingly short span of time, the frequency isn't painful anymore. It's music, revealing great truths. Devarro now proclaims himself the ecstatic, the knower of hidden things, the key to ancient wonder.
The artifacts have broken him and rebuilt him with this new, corrupt confidence. Through the use of his thaumaturgy, he gains what he calls special sight.
He visually transports himself to the ancient Vaal city that once stood there, witnessing a Vaal harvest sacrifice at the base of a great pyramid.
And the description in his journal is horrifyingly sensory and immediate. He watches the steps run red with a river of blood, a crimson tide that doesn't stop at the vision's edge.
It cascades toward him, washing over his skin.
He notes that his body shakes as if lightning was reverberating as he feels himself absorbing the strength of that blood ritual.
And the contamination becomes literal.
Yeah.
It moves from the psychological to the physical. When he returns to his senses, he reaches up to touch his face.
And he finds it, horrifyingly and marvelously, pelted with that same salted vermilion.
That is the moment of definitive physical marking. The blood is no longer symbolic. It is literal, sticky contamination that he can feel, taste, and smell.
Devarro has moved permanently from an objective researcher observing echoes of history to a corrupted participant permanently bonded to the ancient power. The artifacts have reached out of the past, touched him, and claimed him as their own.
And that ensures his descent is permanent and visible,
Yeah.
at least to him.
Yes. Which brings us to phase 3, torment and ritual necessity, or the hunger.
The initial joy, the singing, it has stopped entirely. Devarro is now plagued by a debilitating sickness and that indelible blood marking that he cannot clean. It stalks him relentlessly, waking and dreaming.
And the relics now scream of hunger. The ruins themselves call out to him like needy children for blood. Oh, so much more blood.
The initial internal exhilaration has just curdled into an unyielding curse and a driving torment. He's desperate for silence.
He attempts repeatedly to wash the blood from his face, knowing logically that nobody else can see the red, yet knowing it is definitively physically present on him. This inescapable contamination ensures his madness is his constant companion.
And it drives him to act externally to resolve his internal agony.
This is where he takes that devastating action. Driven by the need to silence the screaming hunger, he acquires 3 young Karui slaves. He describes them chillingly as strapping young lads of 17.
And he takes them directly to the ancient ruins associated with the artifacts.
The truly terrifying depth of the corruption is revealed here. It's so deeply ingrained in the ancient stonework that the ruins themselves communicate directly.
The slaves heard it.
Upon arrival, they heard the stone's dark whispers and instantly understood the fate awaiting them. They pleaded desperately for their lives.
But Devarro was lost completely to his obsession. He was focused only on satisfying the demonic hunger that plagues him.
He ignores their terrified pleas. He executes them on Atsiri's altar, pouring their essence onto the stone.
As the sanguine liquid is absorbed by the stone, the hunger is momentarily satisfied, but Devarro's mind utterly frays further.
He is immediately rewarded with a lurid, powerful vision of Queen Atsiri herself, naked and aroused, bathing in blood.
This vision immediately transitions into a powerful sexual obsession that completely defines his new existence. He records shivering with both fear and anticipation.
The cost of that brief, purchased silence was not just the lives of the 3 slaves, but his entire moral compass. He has traded 3 human lives for a momentary respite, only to be immediately consumed by a violent, lustful obsession with an ancient, murderous queen of the Vaal.
He is officially moved from a Templar researcher on a secret mission to a willing, murderous cultist in service of the artifacts.
And finally, we reach phase 4, union and madness. He chillingly labels it the happy family.
Devarro's connection to shared reality has utterly dissolved. He now sees his queen constantly, realizing their worlds are only separated by easily traversable doors and bridges,
which they cross in dreams amidst the coagulation of our victim's blood. He has learned the forbidden arts of blood thaumaturgy.
The shift from fear to total murderous devotion is complete. He refers to the grotesque gore as their wedding bed. He believes he will soon be physically closer to her than his own flesh.
And the forbidden knowledge he sought, blood thaumaturgy, which we can infer is a form of profane magic fueled by life essence, is now his absolute path to eternal dark union with the ancient queen.
Meanwhile, the outside world intrudes. Theopolis is thrown into a panic over 2 missing noble children, a boy and a girl.
And Devarro, utterly lost in his madness, sees the city's panic as an opportunity to complete his final, ultimate ritual.
His detailing of the horrific event is written with such detached clinical horror. The young girl passed out before he took her life.
And the brave boy's silence, never screaming, even as the blade cut into the soft of his belly, it just shows the extreme detached cruelty of his obsession. The sheer inhumanity of the act is magnified by his clinical observation of their fear and silence.
And he frames the victims not as collateral damage or sacrifices,
but as the components of his eternal union. His final words describe his victims and himself as a happy family, husband, wife, daughter, son.
The fact that the source ends with the presence of his still dripping knife beside him confirms the immediate tangible consequence of Dominus's reckless decision to bring these dangerous Vaal artifacts back to Theopolis.
A complete, uncontrolled descent into murderous, cult-like madness for his devoted researcher, ending with the gruesome sacrifice of 2 children in the name of a demonic, ancient queen.
What stands out here is the speed and the totality of the collapse.
Absolutely. Devarro was a brilliant, highly placed Templar intellectual. His corruption wasn't subtle or slow. It was a rapid, explosive infection that Dominus utterly failed to contain. He unleashed a dangerous cultist and serial murderer into the heart of the capital city.
The cost of pursuing that dark knowledge was paid immediately and violently by the innocent citizens of Theopolis.
Yeah.
That forensic detail is difficult to process.
Yeah.
Let's pivot now from the magical corruption that consumed Navarro to the political corruption that defined the state itself.
Dominus's highly sophisticated use of exile as a policy tool.
Right. Gianna notes the shift to an institutionalized Templar secret police apparatus under Dominus, which shows the intense tightening grip of state control over public and private life in Theopolis.
The creation of a dedicated secret police signals the regime's transition from a typical religious theocracy to something far more modern and controlling.
An emerging dictatorship.
Essentially, where surveillance and fear become the primary tools of governance. If citizens have to fear being followed, overheard, or reported on by their neighbors or by those wearing the Templar insignia, the political climate has changed entirely.
The perceived sanctity of the state is replaced by pervasive, tangible paranoia.
And this leads us to the true, cynical definition of exile under Dominus. We have detailed documents listing the horrifying crimes of common, brutal criminals.
Like Hillock, charged with 6 counts of homicide, infanticide, rape, and various larcenies.
The letter of exile for Hillock is a disturbing but publicly justifiable document. It lists the man's monstrous acts and concludes with the declaration that God has charged Dominus with his redemption, banishing him to the wild continent of Rayclast to repent your sins.
That was the carefully curated, public-facing image of the exile policy.
Dealing with the absolute dregs and monsters of society. This maintained the facade of divine justice.
But the true purpose, as one source makes abundantly clear, was fundamentally political and highly strategic. Dominus needed a legal, justifiable way to remove obstacles to his power.
He exiled anyone who was going to give him trouble, who was going to cause ripples in his progressive theocracy.
We have to pause on that phrase, progressive theocracy. It's Orwellian.
It is. It means Dominus was not interested in divine governance or democratic progress. He was interested in a progressive implementation of his own dark vision.
Which required absolute compliance.
And therefore, Rayclast, the dangerous, cursed continent across the sea, was institutionalized not merely as a penal colony for criminals like Hillock,
but as a deliberate, systematic method of removing political, intellectual, and moral obstacles to his absolute power.
Can we identify the specific types of trouble Dominus was targeting? If Hillock was the public face of exile, who were the hidden targets?
The sources indicate the targets were often individuals like Cassius Guild engineers who asked too many questions or refused to cooperate fully. Scholars like Aramer, who saw the true horror in the Val documents.
So people with intellectual credibility or moral authority who could potentially articulate an effective opposition.
Exactly. By exiling them, Dominus removed not just their bodies, but their voices and their ability to organize within the capital.
And the consequences of this policy were brutal, even for those political dissenters who survived the initial journey. Exiles faced immediate shipwreck, isolation.
And often ended up alone on a tiny island, where the relative safety of the main continent of Rayclast would have been preferable. It was a sentence of probable death by exposure or madness.
But crucially, the physical isolation and environmental hardship were only secondary to the psychological and political consequence. The source reveals Dominus's ultimate strategy.
He knew that the corruption of Rayclast actively spread to the minds of the exiles, turning them against one another.
That is a terrifyingly brilliant and cynical mechanism of control. Dominus ensured that even if a group of politically savvy, organized exiles managed to survive the journey,
the very air and earth of Rayclast would prevent them from ever forming a unified opposition capable of returning to challenge him.
Precisely. The goal was perpetual disunity. Among the exiles, the sources confirm, alliances shift and change constantly, guaranteeing they would remain fractured, consumed by paranoia, internal strife, and survival struggles.
He successfully weaponized the inherent environmental and psychic corruption of the exiled territory itself to prevent political resistance.
Using a naturally occurring terror as his final invisible line of defense against any attempt to overthrow him, it was a true political masterstroke built on cruelty and foresight.
So we've navigated Dominus's 20-year rule in extreme detail. It was a period where patronage was never a reward, but rather a direct path to intellectual and spiritual corruption.
Intellectual curiosity, exemplified by the rapid, catastrophic fall of Navarro, became a direct door to damnation.
And even subtle ethical resistance, like Cassius' quiet mechanical sabotage, was met with ruthless, immediate political exile. His entire legacy is one of self-serving, absolute power enabled by dark science.
And tragically fueled by the human and intellectual cost of his subjects and researchers.
This exhaustive deep dive raises a critical, lingering question that I think shapes the entire subsequent history.
Dominus pursued power with the goal of resurrecting the eternal empire and creating a new one in his own image, presumably one of lasting stability. Yet, in his pursuit, he failed utterly to secure true divine power.
As evidenced by his physical inability to touch or leverage the sign of purity.
Instead, by focusing on the Vol, he unleashed the ancient, violent, and highly contagious corruption contained within those artifacts, poisoning his city's elite scholars and leading to atrocities like Devarro's murderous descent.
The true consequence of his reign was not the empire he built, because that foundation was clearly self-destructing.
It was the destructive knowledge and the viral, ancient corruption he recklessly failed to contain. He opened doors that should have remained sealed, setting the stage for every disaster that followed his disappearance.
He sought control and total, absolute power, believing his formidable intellect could manage and direct these dark forces.
But his ambition was so warped by the darkness he courted that the very foundations he meticulously laid were built on self-destructing corruption. He didn't just fail, he actively sabotaged the future of the state by unleashing forces he could not possibly comprehend or manage.
And that failure, Dominus's reign, it set the stage for generations of moral compromise. If piety in Valenta's research was aimed at the supposed betterment of the human condition, yet the methods involved unspeakable acts on human beings, political enemies, and helpless slaves. What is the true fate of any society when the definition of betterment is decided exclusively by those who truly consider their subjects mere stones in a grand, bloody cathedral?
When the powerful rationalize atrocity as progress, where is the line between science and ultimate damnation?
Something for you to mull or explore on your own.